All right, thanks to Ross Cullen. And Russia's Interfax agency says residents of Neonoska have been told to leave the area starting tomorrow, with authorities beginning work on the site. So that news can't be too comforting for residents there in terms of what those radiation levels are. Joining us here in the studio, Dr. Emily Landau, Director of the Arms Control and Regional Security Program at the INSS. Great to have you back with us.
Hi, good evening.
Let's just go back to the explosion itself. As an arms control expert, what's your take on what might have happened there in Russia?
Well, what it seems to be coming out of the media right now is that it was a failed test of a cruise missile that's powered by like a mini nuclear reactor. In other words, the energy for the explosion is nuclear. It's a failed test, and then the Russians have been not very forthcoming with information. But this is, first of all, it's not a surprise. We saw this in the Cold War many times when there are nuclear accidents, when tests don't work. The superpowers aren't too eager to expose the fact that they've had a failure. Putin has been talking about this cruise missile since last year at least. He's been bragging about it, that it will reach every corner of the earth.
I mean, now that there's been a withdrawal from the INF Treaty by the United States, if we're talking Cold War era especially, should the U.S. be more concerned? Is something happening there that should
Well, these are parallel developments. This cruise missile isn't really connected to the INF issue. The United States pulled out of the INF Treaty because the Russians were breaching the treaty. Plus the fact that the Chinese, over 80% of their missiles are in that range that is prohibited or was prohibited by the INF. They're not party to the treaty. There's no constraints on their missile program, and they have many of these missiles, which are a concern for both the United States and Russia. So that's the INF treaty. But there's a nuclear arms race that's going on, obviously, between the United States and Russia.
Speaking of concerns, Emily, one of the things I've read about this, if this indeed was a nuclear-powered engine, a nuclear engine, is that the U.S. looked at this technology and concluded it's too unstable, too dangerous. For one thing, it leaves a trail of radioactivity as it travels, and it looks like Russia is developing this very dangerous technology.
Well, the United States did experiments with this back in the 1950s and 60s, and they abandoned it because it wasn't working. So you're right, and it's not only that, but it's a technology that it seems to be quite difficult to make it work. And there's no guarantee, I mean, for the Russians that this is ever going to work. It might be one failure after another. But we've seen Russia being extra secretive, and this has come at the expense of the population, because they were not forthcoming about the fact that they were doing this test. In the first days, they were saying that there was no radioactive material in the air. Then they were forced to admit it, something that's a little bit reminiscent of Chernobyl. Yeah. Even though this explosion is of a different order of magnitude. I mean, it's much less than Chernobyl, but it's the same disregard for the population.
Right. All right, Dr. Emily Landau, thanks so much.